So just to be sure, I hope you are in the right place. So this is a different kind design in the public sector. There's so much great content, and one person just approached me and asked like, what are you going to talk about? There's another session and so on. It's like, I can't make this decision for you. So thanks in any way for your interest and for choosing this session. So briefly some hands, just to understand what experience is in the room. Who's working in the private sector? Yeah, this looks a bit like the majority, but by far not everyone. Okay. So who is working for or with the public sector? Few hands. Very nice, very nice. I'd love to hear from you in a bit. And the nuances matter. So who's working in the public sector? Who is maybe even a lifetime civil servant or something like that? Cool. Very few hands, but some hands. That's great. That's really great to see. So I'm very curious how my experience overlaps or as well differs here and there. So I'm very interested in hearing some things. So I'm going to talk about like things that are a little bit different in the public sector. So I started out working in consultancies and design agencies in Berlin, in London, Buenos Aires. I worked also with startups. I worked for a global tech company with more than 100,000 employees. And there, at least, we chased quite different targets. But in the public sector, I realized like certain things aren't the same. So here are like 10 things now that I think are different. And these are the things I noticed. So the other people working in and for the public sector might have very different experiences, and I'm very interested in hearing that. So quick overview of what these 10 things are, and then I will go into very tangible examples. So first of all, we are designing for the greater good. We are very much taking an inclusive, not exclusive approach. We are taking accessibility very seriously. We also sometimes have the chance to rewrite the underlying rulebook, which is very exciting. And I don't know, a mission of a decade for me. We also have to collaborate across organizational boundaries because so much is in little silos. And in order to make an impact, we have to collaborate. We also have to go and design where decisions are fundamentally made. And whatever we do, we have to design with systemic complexity in mind, and it will always surface, even though we want to keep it in a small box. We have also the chance to open up, unlike many private sector organizations. And we also, therefore, encourage copycats wherever wanted and needed. And some people talked about like hiring and so on. We are actually growing design capability. So briefly, who am I to talk about all of that? So I'm Martin. I'm head of design user research at DigitalService, or in German DigitalService des Bundes. So that's a digital unit in the German federal level government. We are about 250 people now, slightly more, I think. We are engineers, product managers, designers, user researchers, transformation managers. We were founded in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And by now, we are kind of like a scale-up within the state. We follow an approach that we call change through delivery, because we are only 250 people. We are relatively small. And the whole ecosystem around us is huge. So there's no way we can address all the things that we would like to do. So what we do is we do modern delivery. So we have a certain space of influence. And then by delivering great products, great services, great experiences, we are able to transform as well the underlying rules. We are able to deliver locally and then inspire kind of like a broader change within the system. So it's very much kind of like, experience-based insight, empirical data, and then causing structural change bit by bit. We're working with many of the federal government ministries and the agencies across a number of topics and domain areas. A colleague of mine gave a talk about some of our work in justice services. I will not talk about any of these in really detail, but in my experience in the last 4 years, and now in total kind of like 10 years in the public sector, is like all of these things are somehow similar and also like a little bit different. So I used to work, before coming back to Germany, I used to work for the Government Digital Service in London for over 6 years. The Government Digital Service, or GDS, is the very digital center of the UK government, located at the time at the Cabinet Office, and is most known for this kind of like GovUK, where all of the digital services in the UK, including guidance and information, are to be found. There are like hundreds of millions of visits every year. And if you travel to the UK, you might already have used one of the services, and hopefully you had a good experience, or at least an okay experience. So my task there was enabling service transformation at scale and then engaging with all kinds of people. So that was a minister at the time, but to be honest, we had so many ministers, I don't remember his name, because they kept coming and going. And now I'm leading a team of almost 50 people. If you start counting, these are not 50 people, because it's impossible to get everyone on the picture. So this was last summer, and eventually we'll get there. So currently we're 48 people, and we are in our design and user research discipline. We're communication designers, content designers, one legal designer, very rare, but we try to hire more, service designers, user researchers, UX UI designers. And we work along values that we, and also I, deeply care about. And these are: we care to challenge, we dare to learn, we embrace diverse perspectives, focus on impact, take ownership, and open by default. 2 years ago here, I gave a talk about how we put these values into practice. So let's get through my 10 different things. So we are working for the greater good. So we, as I said in the pitch, we don't work for shareholders. We don't optimize for shareholder values. We work for the public good. And that often gives us a very different perspective. We must plan for tomorrow, but we also need to deliver today. And we need to consider reuse and as well as scale wherever we can, because it's public money, we have responsibility. And there's a bar that every government sets every 4 years when they come into power, and currently it's this. Our administration should be interconnected, efficient, capable, as well as accessible and user-friendly for everyone. We want to digitalize administrative services and offer them barrier-free. So this is from the current German government, from the coalition agreement from last April. So that is really the reference point for us. And now and for the next 3 years, this is the valid North Star, if you like. Coming into the very more concrete things. Number 2, inclusive, not exclusive. It's already quite explicit, but let me go back. This here says we are doing things really for everyone. So we don't start with the most wealthy customer group or something like that. We need to consider everyone, and in the moment we're helping the most vulnerable people, we believe that we're able to make it better really for every other user group as well. So often we are looking at a vast number of use cases, and to be honest, like, we cannot always think of everyone. I had a conversation with my colleague Christine on Friday. She has been the lead designer on the parental leave calculator for 2 years, I think. And she again told me about a new use case she never saw before. So in a usability test this week, she had a father of 3 investigating the benefits they would receive. And the benefits in the calculation really depend on the age of the other 3 kids, because there's certain thresholds, there's certain kind of like timelines, and he wants to understand when his partner bonus basically is higher or lower, and when it's best time even to have the 4th kid. So, and parts of the law, even the policy team and our digital service team has been working on that for a long time. There are these details in the law where you're like, oh, there's an extra rule for certain circumstances. You keep discovering new stuff. So we really have to get these things right, and the trust in the state, essentially, and democracy depends on that. So we're going to where people go, for example, to courts all across the country. We capture then the experience of people. Much of that in Germany, unfortunately, is still very paper-based. Some courts don't even have like essential digital infrastructure, unfortunately. And we're doing interventions. So here, for example, in the city of Osnabrück, that's work that we do across a number of justice services. We have now about not yet a dozen justice services, but quite a few things. But that's very much on a individual service level. it is really vital that we are including everyone. So here's a chart from some report that is co-created with government, and you have two different axes here. On the one hand, you have capability, so that includes access and competencies of people. And then the other dimension is willingness, so that is kind of like usage and as well openness. And all too often, it's very easy as well in interactions with the users to get kind of like people who are really like tech savvy or more progressive in their applications, or another group kind of reflected professionals. But then there are also people who are way more kind of like careful or more conservative, or only use, for example, just WhatsApp, and this is where their digital understanding ends. But we have to really ensure that where we are also meeting people who are like barely online or are afraid to interact with a state online because of bad experience in the past. So when we're going to these courts, we are meeting people who might not be able to read because they have dyslexia or all of that stuff. So in the moment we're using, for example, just online recruiting platforms, we would never get some of these people in these other kind of like lower user groups. So it's very important that we find as well where we meet people across the whole spectrums on these two dimensions. Yes, this is the D1 Digital Index report. So if you look for D1, you can find that online. And of course, German government has been working on digital service for, well, over 25 years. But there has been also like no shared understanding of what good service means. And recently we wanted to change some of that. And we wanted to establish essentially like a clear description of good services. My former boss in the UK, Lou Down, has written a lovely book about that called Good Services, and we continued some of the work I started in the UK and brought it to the public sector in Germany this winter. So there was a very lovely thing that I found even deeply, deeply impressive. The ministry sent out 9,000 letters to randomly selected people in Germany. So maybe you're among the 0.0001% or so of the population who received such a letter. It was basically an invitation to work with government to figure out what good digital service or analog service means and what it looks like. So hundreds of people responded to that, and then we started, here was the winter, to workshop exactly that. So it was a whole day, and it was about really how are services understandable, how they're accessible, how they're easy to navigate. This was in Salon Babette in Berlin, opposite of the Kino International. And people from all walks of life were basically present there, which was terrific. They shared their personal stories, and then they had us formulate some quality criteria for government services. They also reviewed the things that public servants, just the week before, had created, and we did a bit of a match and extend. Because we had to make sure that on the one hand, we have the lens of all the people, but also the people who are doing the work, who are establishing the services and ensure service quality. So we ran 2 workshops with the civil servants as well from all across the country. So in total, in these in-person workshops, we had some 90 people participating. It was in Erfurt, here in Cologne, and as well Berlin, plus another 1,500 people as well, doing a survey online and via telephone. So it was very important to really engage with citizens to understand as well what service quality means in this country and how to describe that in very tangible words. Here's a tiny bit of a disclaimer or an acknowledgement. So most of the work that I'm describing, we are doing as digital service in very close partnership with a number of ministries, so the Ministry of Justice, Digital, Family Affairs, and the Interior. Just a quick remark. So when I talk about inclusive and not exclusive, back to individual services, we don't launch offerings that haven't received any accessibility testing. So it's very important that, for example, we're testing with people who are blind or have limited vision. Over the years, we've been working with a number of partners, so NGOs and nonprofits, to help us really build the capability, build the processes, and to be really good at that. So in all kinds of services, we carefully as well map and plot who we haven't reached out yet or we haven't engaged with. So we are aware and we can make a plan on how to get them as well on board. I touched already on accessibility a bit. So that's the thing we need to do by law, by the constitution. But how do we do that? So first of all, we have to start in our organization. So that means we have a mandatory introduction to accessibility for everyone who joins. So as I said, we're about 250 people now. Recently, we had a new office manager, but also a new chief technology officer, and they both had to sit in our lit introduction to accessibility. Because we have to make sure that everybody understands, for example, the core principles of the web content accessibility guidelines that describe that a service has to be perceivable and understandable and operatable and robust. So we are able to speak at least kind of like the basic same language when we talk about some of the related work. We also have internally, for example, little learning bites that pop up on Slack that are sometimes a bit provocative or memey sometimes. And we then developed our own kind of like awareness-raising tools. So 2 years ago for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, we built a small tool called Wie viele Menschen, like how many people, to illustrate as well the consequences of lack of accessibility. So you can add or like put in the number of users of your service, and then based on publicly available statistics, it's shown how many people are affected who may have a disability or impairment or some other characteristics that you should have or should take into account. And before publication, we also reached out to all of the specialists in government to make sure that we get things right and that this doesn't exist yet, but it didn't. And then on the process level, we are establishing new little tools and also like build very much on the work of others. So in the UK, there are the UK accessibility personas that are very data-driven work. And we started working with these accessibility personas as part of this little format, which is called pizza-powered accessibility check. So there we are then testing or simulating as well the experience of a person with dyslexia or a person with a severe tremor who only uses the keyboard and so on. So it gives us a better idea of where we are with the service in the middle of the development. Based on that, because as I said, take ownership is one of our values. So one of our user researchers who also like codes sometime a bit, he was writing a little Chrome extension that allows us to more easily run these personas in our browsers. So it's available for Chrome and Microsoft Edge and other kind of like Chromium browsers. So you can very quickly like switch as well these personas to run a simulation, for example, which is very, very handy. So it's something that is now for a while available on the Chrome Web Store, so you can install it on your browser, and it has now quite a few hundred users around the world. Then last year, for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, we thought we built our own little accessibility insight and testing lab. So this is on our kind of like first floor in the office, and is there to really raise awareness for everyone, for people in the organization, but also to show as well visitors that we deeply care about that stuff. And we have some of the stats that I showed you from this little tool we've basically put on the wall, and to introduce all of the accessibility personas. And then Thursday was Global Accessibility Awareness Day again. We published the German version of the accessibility personas, and we developed more guidance and more tools all around that. And we do have a very amazing group of accessibility ambassadors that are engineers and designers and user researchers and product managers, and they do all of this work together. So we've been collaborating as well on Thursday with other parts of government to run like a 3-hour interactive session where we made it very tangible for civil servants and public servants to understand what accessibility is and how to do it. So it is very much a group effort. Number 4, the underlying rulebook, rewritten. What's that, you might wonder? So in government, we all too often start at point 2. We quickly need a solution for a very immediate problem because the minister has to show up in front of a camera and propose something, right? Like that is our reality. But in our work, we've been able to quite shift this a bit. So we are really very much like trying whenever possible to start at point 1. So problem first and then solution second. But often, this is us taking this approach at DigitalService, while others in the public sector haven't been able to really push for that necessarily. So we wanted to really make sure that we are able to change the rules of kind of like the wider public sector as a total. And personally, this was kind of like my mission for the last 4 years, even though I didn't know it at first, to get a piece of policy that embeds all of our ways of working into a written form. And end of September last year, I had my little moment of success where actually Digital Minister Carsten Wildberger signed a regulation that is all about standards, that makes user reset mandatory, that requires continuous testing, that is creating as well the space for more kind of like careful consequence scanning of our work as well. It wasn't a straight path for that, but like once it was in the Bundesgesetzblatt, so announced as a piece of legislation, I printed it out and I was like, yeah. Yeah. My father didn't care about that so much, but he was impressed when I said, like, we're working with the dean. And he was like, now you have achieved something, son. Because we did all of the legislative stuff via another very useful vehicle. So Germans are famous for like standardizing stuff and like norming stuff. So probably the height of the table is described in a D norm, for example. So at some point, almost 2 years ago, we were at the point like, why don't we try to like standardize the standardization of public services via a very formalized standard? I was like, okay. So we produced a so-called DIN spec. It's like a mini ISO norm at a national level. And it's basically a formal specification of how we should be working in government when we're working on services, and has that number 66336. You can look it up. And to do that, we assembled a very mixed group of people together with the National Institute of Norms, the DIN in Berlin. And yeah, so you see in this picture people from all parts of government, central government, federal government, local government, states, but also like companies, consultancies, like startups. There was a founder of an AI startup as part of that group as well, and people from academia as well, representing citizen groups and other actors as well. So it's quite a group. And usually government likes to write its own standards, but here we really took a different way and we co-wrote that standard. So there was a process for about 3 months, and it was pretty hardcore. It was pretty detailed. I was really worried that with such a big group, we might end up with lower standards. But surprisingly, this was not the case at all. Everybody was like cheering us or pushing us up. And so like, oh, if we have different rules for accessibility in every state in Germany, we should all align on the highest state, not on the lowest, right? And we're like, yes, this sounds good. So somehow we were able, within 3.5 months, to get through all of that and co-produce then a new underpinning service standard. So if you are from the private sector and read German, you will see a lot of things that are common, like, hey, you need to understand the users, or you need to describe a clear goal, or take a make, test, learn approach all the time, or set measurable objectives and then iterate accordingly. That isn't the standard for the public sector, so we had to create that. And yeah, with my worry, like somehow the stars aligned and all of the 16 states and the federal government could agree that this is a really good thing. So now the big task is to make all of that actionable. So it's really great to have kind of like a binding thing in theory, but now we have to create a lot of like guidance and tools and reference points. So we're doing this on servicestandard.gov.de, and we'll talk more about that in a quick second. So this thing is binding, but it's also supposed to be helpful. That's at least our idea. So we've been trying to rewrite the underlying rulebook, but now we have to implement that rulebook. And that's really what keeps us busy now. And our message is that this kind of thing, the service standard, really helps people. Getting to number 5. So this is already a great example, I think, of collaboration across organizational boundaries and borders, because government is not small. We have federal level government with about like 400,000 civil servants. So there's so much happening all the time. So we have to make sure that we're using money and resources very in a sensible way. So collaboration really makes sense, but it's also, of course, time costly in its own. So much of our work is described in this little overview. So this is how we are trying to transform services. So this is an overview of how 575 services were supposed to be fully online by the end of 2022. That didn't fully happen, to be fair. But the interesting thing is that only like a smaller portion, some kind of like 20 or so percent, are actually delivered by federal level government. And this blue little thingy is us. So we are just like one small actor. So we have to really make sure that we're collaborating as much as we can to kind of like leverage as well. So I did mention the website for the service standard. So this is where we, for example, are recording implementation successes. So how does the state pension provider, the Deutsche Rentenversicherung Bund, how do they, for example, establish user research in their organization? Or how does a city work with senior citizens? So we keep recording that and publish as well, like what good looks like in another part of the public sector. We're also writing kind of like definitive guidance and guidelines. So again, we're co-producing this with others, always with the best people in that specific domain. So here's, for example, a guidance on the service standard website that describes how to write in plain language, how to make sure that at a reading level of like B1 or B2, it is understandable what government wants of you. Or here's another example where we show how to really ask clear questions and structure forms well, and essentially create good forms. So, because even in the age of AI, forms will not go out of fashion, at least not in government, I tell you that. We also offer workshops to share knowledge and help colleagues here, for example, in Hamburg, to understand as well where are common barriers. And in this case, it was a lot about like digital identity, where Germany has to do much more work. And where all of this collaboration comes kind of like to the fullest fruition is really our shared design system. So we have a design system that is now used by quite a number of different digital units all across government. Also government suppliers started using it. And we have now in total like 600 people all contributing to that in different levels. So this is in our office some time ago, where there's a person from Schleswig-Holstein, from the north, and from Bavaria. So state level, federal level government, all trying to work on unifying the experiences that people have with government and create really robust foundations. Because we really have to fix very disjointed experiences like this one. So this is about taking a car off the road in Potsdam. Just by kind of like even squinting your eyes, you can see everything looks different, looks a bit kind of like 2000s, and it's a bit of a mess. And every step of the service feels different and looks very, very different as well. So by working together across organizational boundaries, we are able to unify as well things. So here's an alternative journey where different platforms and different services by 4 different providers are unified. This is really, really hard work, so we have to collaborate to get anywhere close to this. So we created a unified cross-government brand and design system where you have kind of like 4 building blocks. You have a little header, you have a government domain, you have a symbol or kind of like a mark that indicates that this is cross-government effort, and you have the mentioned design system. And this is all about like harmonizing experiences, minimize waste, cut costs, and build trust, of course, with the users. Last but not least, in this section, we are also running peer reviews for services. So a service team with an engineer, with a designer, product manager, user researcher, they meet with colleagues from other parts of the public sector to get timely feedback on their work. They hear then what could be improved, what could be done differently, what should be done next. And what comes out is a little publicly available report that, of course, on the one hand, acknowledges all the good work that is happening, but it also contains a full list of all the things that the team should be doing next. So it highlights as well the gaps in the work and suggests area of improvement. These are, as I said, like published openly on the internet, so everybody can as well like see and learn what good user-centered design practice in government currently looks like, and reference that in their work as well. The one thing that we see again and again in the work of service teams is that certain things are totally beyond their remit. Certain things they simply cannot change, they cannot affect, because it is ingrained in law, for example. This is why we have to work where the real decisions are made. So in the public sector design space, we often seen that there are all of these forces are somehow different to the private sector. So when I was working, for example, for Nokia, there were certain technology constraints, there were certain kind of like business logics, but the underpinning rules in government are rather policy and legislation and regulation, so all of that. So we realized we have to really go into that space. Here's a way I like to illustrate that. So all the things that people experience are on the left, so interacting with services and products and guidance, but where all the decisions are made is on the very right. So this is the policy, this is the regulation, this is the laws. And we had to embed design there because all of that touches all the things to the left and cascades what we then call kind of like downstream. So luckily, Germany has a thing called the digital check. And that is really to ensure that new and changed laws are kind of like digital ready by default. So that means that in a law, you don't have things like wet signatures described, but it rather suggests kind of like data exchange right from the start. So one of the things that we started doing is working then with government ministries on their very early drafts of laws when they are just in the making. So one thing my colleagues are offering is kind of like a 2-hour visualization support session. So every week you can kind of like book a slot, and then it helps really identify and reduce complexity in laws from the early stage. It helps as well like spot opportunities for digital early on. And it is a pathway for deeper engagement. So the next level of kind of like activity is kind of like a policy discovery sprint that runs for 6 to 8 weeks. And this is where we have a fully disciplinary team, engineers, designers, product managers, go and work with lawmakers when they are kind of like early stage, trying to come up with a change of law or new piece of legislation. So this is something we have done for the implementation of the EU AI directive into German law. I think there was kind of like paused in Parliament or something, don't know. But also interesting things like moving cattle or some business energy tax. So like it's a whole range of different things that we're working on, but it's very much understanding like what is the problem of the user here, then doing user research, going out into the field, talking to people, and then doing a lot of like visualizations essentially and trying to make sure that the policy people and the lawmakers understand the material from a different angle. 7. I'm looking at time as well. So design with this systemic complexity always. There's never a moment where that is not the case. So one of the priorities for the digital minister right now is creating an end-to-end service around starting a business. And we realized this is an extra tough nut to crack because there are a number of services that all need to be integrated, everything from company registration or tax number issuing, all of that stuff. And there's so many stakeholders involved in all of that. So our digital teams really try to like cut dependencies, right? They don't want to depend on too many other actors, but we have to make sure that all of these things are aligned. And yeah, that is why we keep creating a lot of like sense-making maps for senior stakeholders, for middle management, and also operational stuff, because no one gets the whole picture. No one ever has seen the whole picture ever before. So this is what we see again and again. So making things visible allows us to also like intervene. That includes also like the legislative process, where even people with decades of experience in that space were kind of like baffled about some of the aspects we were able to map along a 7-meter wall. And then it allows us to really point at where we can change bits of the system bit by bit by bit. So we can map things, then we can create alternatives and kind of like rebuild as well established things from the ground up. Number 8, opening up. So that became already visible. Public sector design means opening up in various ways. So all of our code is on GitHub, my presentations are on GitHub, you can find this stuff there. We always inform about our work. So here's my colleague Charlotte talking at a TEDx event. We always try to welcome as well the next generations of public service designers here from the Netherlands, also from Estonia or Germany. We are writing also public week notes for transparency and accountability. So here's my colleague Bene, who's a product manager, writing and me writing almost every week. We also created our own public-facing meetup in Berlin 3 years ago. So we run this together with our friends from the City Lab. And you can learn there about our work and ask questions and see as well the work of many others doing vital work in the public sector. So we discussed everything from data visualization to innovating healthcare or accessibility or voting or better policy design. And we also design posters because we love visual design culture as well. And we're constantly blogging. So we are blogging about 3 times a month, and many of these blogs are as well from the user-centered design team in our organization. And because we work in the open, we really invite people to copy and reuse our work. And gratefully, our international colleagues are doing exactly the same for the same purpose. So here's a post from this week from a US colleague. He wrote that, "If you ever wondered, is it worth the time to write about my work and the lessons learned? This is your answer." An 18F, that's the digital unit of the US government that Trump shut down. An 18F blog post was read on the other side of the world, turned into a great conversation, and helped Martin and Lena and the rest of the team of their work and gov.de. Pushing what you know in the middle helps everyone, and you never know how until you do it. So that's really lovely to see as well, like how some of the work that they have been able to open up all of the code again on GitHub and so on allowed us to do very similar work. So this is some of the work that they have been doing when it comes to ordering government domains and so on. And we've been really nicking quite a bit of this stuff, like the search and the guidance and so on. So it's very, very powerful to see as well people sharing their work and then being able to copy. And when we copy things, we proudly say so. So here's an example where we write about all of the reuse and adaptation in the accessibility space, where we've been working on the shoulder of our UK colleagues. I did talk as well about the digital ready work. So again, in return, UK government, they nicked our stuff, and we were really proud and enjoyed when that happened. So it's really like cross-pollination of ideas and building on each other's work. We also created formats for kind of like global spelling exchange. So here's our international design work with more than 4,000 people from over 75 countries now. At some point in 2023, we ran a conference that lasted over 24 hours. At the end, we were very, very tired, but we had one country presenting every full hour. So we started with New Zealand and Australia and Japan and Taiwan, and ended then with Chile, Canada, and the US. And again, the idea was really to inspire each other and to see what is possible and, shamelessly copy our work. I talked about the service standard and the service quality work. Again, similar work was already established in the UK or in Australia, Canada. So we were able to build on that. Lastly, we are growing design capability. We're not shrinking, not firing, we're not replacing anyone. So I'm on a personal mission to as well like track all of the roles in the German public sector. So I maintain a little nerdy spreadsheet. So this is my spreadsheet for 16 months or so. And here's some of the numbers that I posted on LinkedIn last year. So last year there were 23, at least, this is whatever I count, right? At least 23 user-centered design roles opened across German public sector. That was from 14 different public sector organizations. So it's quite different organizations. Sometimes even like the Federal Crime Office hiring a UX designer. I'm like, oh, interesting, tell me more. So it's a very interesting range of organizations, everything from public health to justice services and also like more secretive organizations of government looking for design talent, which is amazing to see. And often it's these kind of like 5 profiles. So it's accessibility, communication design, UI, UX design, service design, and system design. Unfortunately, user research keeps missing. But I also created a little job board. This is the screenshot from earlier today. It lists all the things that I find. So whenever I find a new role, I update it there. And actually, we are looking for user researchers. And so does as well the state pension provider, the Bundes. They're also looking for user researcher. So getting to the end of the time. So again, like these are my 10 points. This is where I see differences. And I welcome all of the conversation with anyone else who has experience working with the public sector. Thank you so much.